I want to talk for a second about a concept that's really important to me and probably for a lot of people who have found me on this channel. And the concept is that in the economy of God, there is no loss. Joseph Smith said in the Lectures on Faith that a religion that does not require the sacrifice of all things never has the power to life and salvation. Now, I've heard that many times over my lifetime. It's not something that is often quoted in church anymore. It's not quoted in General Conference anymore because in general, that's not the religion that we preach anymore. But that always resonated with me, and I always wondered what it meant. People covenant in the temple to consecrate all they have to the church and believe that that is what it means, but still, consecration is even more than that. It's actually much more than that. It's not just your time, talents, and your possessions and giving to the church. It's giving to God and having that relationship there and being so humble as a child that you're willing to take whatever the Lord is willing to inflict upon you. That's how humble we are. So how is that there's no loss in that? Well, the basic definition of sacrifice is not just giving up all you have for nothing. That is dumb. Sacrifice is giving up something for something that is better. And as you sacrifice one thing, God fills in, or He's willing to fill in what you sacrificed with something much better. So how does He do that? The best example I can think of is that of Joseph of Egypt. And Joseph is actually a type for the church, for us, for those who are saved in the last days. It's an end-time prophecy. And you notice Joseph, among his brothers, who is a standout guy and receives some dreams and visions that he's supposed to be something great or greater. And his father and his brethren don't appreciate that at all. And his brothers figure out a way to, first they're going to kill him, and then they decide to sell him off to some traveling, are they Ishmaelites maybe? And he gets sold off, he gets sold into slavery. So as far as his family and his, let's just say his religion, his belief system, where he came from, everything that he held dear, he was forced out of that, he was taken out of that, and he was taken to Egypt. Let's also call that Babylon. And he was put in a position where he had nothing of what he had. So here's a man who has suffered the loss of all things. He took no possessions. He didn't have the coat that his father gave him, which is symbolic. He had nothing, and he becomes a servant, a slave. He dies multiple deaths. In the house of Potiphar, even though he puts everything he has into it, he loses everything again, and he's put into prison. Joseph takes that and is still humble, still continues to hunger and thirst after righteousness and after God, and to make God his focus. And you can tell that because God is still willing to give him gifts of the Spirit and to give him the ability to interpret dreams and prophecies. And God would not do that with a man who wasn't cleansed from sin. So this extremely humble guy, taken out of everything, eventually, and over many years, that leads him to wisdom. And that wisdom is something that you can't get in the safety of the rest of where his brothers were. You look at all the stories of his brothers, Judah, various Reuben, different people, scoundrels, and all of their sins safely in the house of Jacob. And it just reminds me of the parable of the prodigal son. And here the prodigal son is actually Joseph. Joseph, who goes out and loses everything. And by it, Joseph receives wisdom. He gains great wisdom. And in the end, he becomes greater than all of his brothers that stayed home. And again, think of prodigal son. Think of the brother who stayed home. What do you have to sacrifice to receive greater wisdom? What do you have to sacrifice to get better things? Well, it really is the death of who you are. The death of your natural man, the death of your evil desires, and putting your heart and soul into God. And with Joseph, much of that he didn't ask for. Much of it he didn't want. But it did require the sacrifice of all things for him. And he was willing. Joseph was willing to do and be that person. He could have at any time taken what he was given. He could have cheated with Potiphar's wife. He could have sold his soul in the prison. He could have done anything, but he clung to the thing that he knew was most important, and that was his God. And God continued to give him greater spiritual blessings. And in the end, he was able to give back of that to his brothers. These brothers who stayed home, didn't wander out, didn't risk anything, and actually ended up in the comfort of their home under the protection of Jacob, being not the best people in the world. If you read the Old Testament, it shocks you because you think that Israel, the children of Israel, are somehow these great guys that God wants to protect, and it ends up being that the vast majority of the children of Israel are absolute scoundrels and cheaters and liars and adulterers and murderers. And that's not what you really expect out of the Old Testament, and one reason people have a really, really hard time with it. Anyway, what did Joseph lose? Everything, multiple times. What did he gain? Everything, multiple times, and he gained so much that it overflowed to him. Overflowed to Egypt, to Pharaoh, to everyone in the land for 7 years. It saved everyone. And for his brothers, it saved them, and it gave them a landing place. And they finally, after all that, realized that Joseph's path was the better path, and they humbled themselves a lot. So this is obviously, hope it's obvious, this is actually a type of Christ as well. So Christ, again, is born into the church, and he is thrust out not by accident, but by his own will and his own doing. He's thrust out, and he is taken, or he goes out into the wilderness. And again, for him, this is not lost, because he's seeking after his Father. He's seeking for messengers and for further light and knowledge. And he's willing to give up everything. And so when people ask him, where do you live? He said, Son of Man hath not where to lay his head. I don't have a home. And he spent his time wandering and teaching people on the hillside, anybody who'd come out to him. Jesus without a home. Jesus who suffered and sacrificed everything Jesus, who was not accepted by the church, but gave that broken heart and a contrite spirit to the death, to the very end of his life, and he sought not his own things. Many people want to stay in the careful and comfortable protection of what they believe is safe. And in the end, what is safe is to rely on the Lord. What is safe is the God of our fathers. What is safe is to look at the example of Joseph of Egypt and Jesus and men of God. Lehi also, who I'm sure Lehi was one of the better members of the church in his day, and he ends up preaching against it, being thrust out, losing apparently all connection to the church in his day, not by his choice. So he's in the desert wandering, being persecuted by his own family, and he's led to a different place and a better place. And he also, like Abraham, becomes a father of many nations. So, how is this applicable? People are afraid of loss. In the economy of God, there is no loss. There is no loss. When we say trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lead not to thine own understanding, this is talking about trusting in the Lord and trusting that when you do what your heart knows to be right, what is according to your integrity, to the level that you're willing to do that, God will bless you, and he will take that sacrifice and he will fill it in with something better. And that better is peace and joy and understanding of why the thing that you did is better and what you can do next. And it's line upon line, precept upon precept. And here a little and there a little. It's grace for grace. It's more light. It's more knowledge. It's more joy. And we all say, I'm not even close to being who God is. Well, he wants us to be more of who he is. And staying stagnant and staying in the same place is not the way. Now, my path is not the path for anybody else. It certainly is not. Nobody needs to go sell their brother into Egypt for that brother to get salvation. But God has a path for you. And do you trust him? Do we all trust him to tell us what we need to take away from our lives, and how to fill in that with something much better? And he's willing to reconstruct us to whatever degree we're willing to allow him to.